Hey everyone, and welcome to the course on how to shape effective teams. We often talk about how important it is to get everyone on the team on the same page, but at the same time, we often find ourselves doing things like working hard on the wrong problem, not measuring the impact of our work, and worst of all, duplicating efforts across teams. We want to be aligned as a team, but we struggle to figure out how. You're not alone. Today, only 13% of teams are considered truly effective. With the onset of remote work over the last few years, the process for how teams come together has changed dramatically. Teams today are distributed around the world, and in order for them to feel connected and moving in the same direction, we need to become clearer than ever before on how they work together. We need a shared understanding. Based on the latest research from Atlassian, creating a shared understanding, that feeling where everyone on the team understands their mission, purpose, and what needs to get done to deliver on goals, is critical to building a high-performing, effective team. The first step to improving your team's shared understanding is to clarify how your team sees itself within the world. We call this team shaping. Pulling from Atlassian's team playbook, the freely available set of practices that fueled Atlassian's teamwork culture, team shaping represents a collection of 4 of these plays focused on making sure everyone on your team knows what they're doing and why. Those plays include the team poster, which is focused on creating a shared direction on where your team is going. Roles and responsibilities, focused on building alignment on the roles within your team and the responsibilities that need to be taken on by each. The network of teams, focused on understanding which teams your team relies on to get work done and the health of those relationships. And working agreements, focused on making explicit how your teams want to work together day to day. If your team is newly formed, or maybe you've recently experienced some turnover or additions to your team, or perhaps your organization has gone through a reorg, or maybe you simply just feel like it's the right time for your team to become a little more intentional on how they work together. Whether you're a delivery team or a leadership team, whatever your situation, team shaping will help you unlock your team's potential to reach that high-performing level. And that's what you're about to learn how to do. During the next 4 videos in this course, you'll learn about the plays that make up team shaping, how to run each play, as well as pick up some expert facilitation tips and tricks. This course was designed by Atlassian's top work futurists, where here they share their experience and favorite practices for helping your teams align and collaborate on work. After this course, you'll be able to create a shared understanding on your team by shaping the way your team works together. Improve your team's effectiveness at using the Atlassian team playbook. And develop some expert facilitation techniques for those plays focused on team shaping. So you're ready to start shaping your team? Check out the next video to continue learning. In this video, you're going to learn what is the team poster play, the pre-work necessary to run the play, guidance and tips on how to facilitate the play, and how you should follow up after running the play.
Teams are often busy working on tasks and get stuff done. But does everyone in the team know why they are doing all these tasks? So let me introduce you to Atlassian's team poster play. You may ask now, what's a team poster? Of course, it's not a poster of your favorite soccer or football team. The team poster is actually a poster about your work team, and yes, it can have pictures of your team members. But it's mostly about getting a common understanding why and what you're doing together. Also, it's not really a poster, it's more a document that you actually can share with others. Run this play to get your team on the same page on what you want to achieve together and create a shared direction for where the team is going. It gives your team more clarity on the direction and gives every team member the opportunity to build a common team purpose together. A shared understanding is important to move work forward and trying to get clarity on your goals without having this discussion over and over and over again. The team poster explains new team members or people from other teams the purpose of your team. Instead of telling the story multiple times, just point them to the team poster. It also works great as a reminder for your team to look at it from time to time and adjust the direction. The team poster should be a living document. Your team members might change, your goals might shift, you need to adjust your customer direction. Do it immediately and don't wait until you rerun this play. By the way, if you're running a project with specific goals and measurements, maybe even across multiple teams, there's another play for that. It's a project poster, and you can also find it in the Atlassian team playbook. You can run the team poster play when you form a brand new team, or also when you're already in established teams working together for years. Run this play especially when your team struggles with a shared understanding on the direction you're going, the customers you're serving, or the goals you're tracking. The team poster will help to get on the same page and move in the same direction as a team. And here's a tip. If you want to add additional information for each team member on the team poster, I can recommend the play My User Manual. It's a play to get to know your team members better and dive deeper into each team member's experiences and preferences. Let's say you form a new team and trying to find a common understanding of your work. When you invite your team to the team poster session, please share with them the template that you'll be filling out when running this play. For this, we've created a Confluence template. To use it, simply click on the link below, which will take you to the team poster play webpage. You can also follow along on that page the step-by-step details. Ask your team members to add their name and their photo to the team poster page in the Meet the Team section of the team poster. Explain to them the goals of the play. Setting the context is important so everyone knows what to expect from the session. You can either run this play in person or as a fully remote team. When running it remotely, please make sure you use a digital collaboration tool to capture the findings and agreements, and so that everyone can follow the updates live. When run this play in person, have some post-it papers and a whiteboard ready for collaboration. Now, when you come together as a team, you will start with discussing your team's purpose and how it fits into the broader company vision. This is an important exercise. Everything your team does should relate to that purpose. Up next, you'll be discussing the problems you're trying to solve. Surprisingly, this is often unclear for a lot of teams. We often talk about things we need to do, but don't spend a lot of time asking ourselves the questions, what is really the problem we're trying to solve here? This leads into discussions about who your customers are and how you measure success. What are the metrics you're tracking, or better, what metrics should you be tracking? This should always be tied to the problem you're trying to solve. After that, you'll talk about your current offerings and your strategic directions. At the end, you'll document how other teams can get in contact with you or work with you. Some teams prefer a specific chat channel and others have a ticketing system. As I said, the team poster play on our webpage has step-by-step details, instructions, and goes far more into details. Run this play at least every 3 months. Priorities shift, team members change, strategies evolve. You want to have always an updated version of your team poster ready. So, why should you create a team poster? It's about a shared understanding on what you're doing together and a common direction where your team is going. After running this play, I hope all team members are on the same page.
In this video, you're going to learn what is the roles and responsibilities play, the pre-work necessary to run the play, guidance and tips on how to facilitate the play, and how you should follow up after running the play.
A lot of teams think they have a clear understanding of who's doing what on their team. But if you ask different people, the answers are also often quite different. A lot of teams don't know, actually, that their roles and responsibilities are not clearly defined. Or even worse, they have a totally different understanding on the responsibilities of a specific role. So here are some questions for you. Are the responsibilities clear for each person on the team? Are roles clearly defined and has everyone on the team the same understanding of it? Or you think there are no gaps at all in terms of roles and responsibilities? If you think your team should probably talk about these things, here's something that can help you. The roles and responsibility play from the Atlassian team playbook. After running this play, you'll have a common understanding on the different roles in your team and their responsibilities. And it's always good to talk about these things and get on the same page, right? No matter whether you're a new team currently in the forming stage or you're a well-established team working together for years, this play will help you. You probably know this, but it can cause quite some tension when team members have different expectations for a specific role. It's definitely a good idea to talk about it, and this play helps you foster that conversation. You might also find out that you're missing a role, or also that some responsibilities in your team are not really defined. The roles and responsibility play brings everyone on the same page. For this play, bring your team together, whether online or in person. Make sure you clearly explain what your team can expect from this session before running this play. Also, the time that is needed to run this play depends on the number of people that participate in it. It usually runs for around 60 minutes, but you should plan more if you're actually more than 5 people. But it can also be exhausting to run a long session and talk about a lot of different roles and responsibilities in just one go. So here's a rule of thumb. If you're more than 9 team members, break the play up into smaller 1-hour sessions. Alright, if you want to follow along as we dive into things, click the link below to access the roles and responsibility play. It explains all the steps in much more details. Start the play by reviewing the team's mission to remind everyone what the team's overall responsibility is. It's important that you're on the same page about why you exist on the team. I can also recommend to run the team poster play, also from the Atlassian team playbook before this one, to get a shared understanding of what your team is doing. Now, write down all the roles in your team. Keep it focused on roles, not on people, right? One person actually can have multiple roles, or multiple persons can have the same role. Like one team member can be a project manager and a programmer. This makes actually 2 roles. So just write down the roles. Each team member should now individually write down the responsibilities of the roles identified. It should be about what you think are the responsibilities of this role. If you're working in a cross-functional team, you might not know all the responsibilities of your teammates. That's okay, but try to fill it out as good as you can. When everyone is done with writing down the responsibilities, share your notes. Go through the list role by role. And this is the interesting part. There can be quite some surprises here, and that's great, really. It means that there were unknown expectations of a specific role. Encourage everyone to share their thoughts. It's important that the team create a shared understanding on the responsibilities of each specific role. I can recommend that you might want everyone to write down their own responsibilities before the meeting, to set a baseline for the kinds of responsibilities they take on. And here's another tip. You probably also find responsibilities that you can't assign to a role. Great job! You identified some gaps. There are probably reasons why no roles want to accept this as their responsibility. Try to resolve those gaps during the session. And with all of your discussions, it's alright if you agree to disagree. Capture the problematic responsibilities and run an extra meeting to dive deeper into it. You should repeat this play, let's say every 3 to 6 months. New roles might be added to your team and responsibilities might have changed. With a roles and responsibilities play, your team gets a clear understanding of what everyone is responsible for. This means less discussions and conflicts within your team.
In this video, you're going to learn What is the network of teams play? The pre-work necessary to run the play, guidance and tips on how to facilitate the play, and how you should follow up after running the play. Well, let me introduce you to Atlassian's latest play in our playbook, the network of teams. It's a fantastic play focused on how we can actually examine and identify the collaboration networks that our teams have. In today's modern world of work, it's very rare for a team to not need the help of others in order to complete their goals. The problem is that most teams, when thinking about who they need, they determine that too late in the process and they ultimately miss it in the end. This results in things like miscommunication on what's needed, things like missed deadlines, and ultimately just frustrated teams. We want to build a shared understanding, not just within our team, but across teams. And this is done through doing things like the network of teams. It's actually one of 4 plays that we at Atlassian believe that every team should pursue in order to help shape the way they work together. The focus is on how we collaborate with those teams outside of our team and maintain and build those relationships. Now, I do have one recommendation though. Before you run a network of teams play, what you should do is make sure you've established your team poster first. This is a play that's focused in on understanding the team's purpose and essentially what success looks like for us. Part of identifying the network of teams is actually understanding what teams are needed to actually help us accomplish our goals and be successful. If we don't understand what success looks like, we don't understand our purpose, we're just going to be guessing in terms of what teams we think we need versus the ones we actually need. All right, we're just about ready to run the play. So before you actually bring everyone together to start doing this mapping, there's a couple things I want you to consider. First, make sure you've set up the space to support how you want people to connect. If you're remote or hybrid, like most teams out there, you're going to want to set up a digital space for you to collaborate. Maybe use a Trello template for the network of teams or a mural board. Now, if you're in person, you can get kind of fun and have big pieces of paper on the wall, stickies, drawing this giant network of teams, which is great. I love that. But you need to remember that you still need to translate that physical network of teams into a digital form eventually so that you can share that with the teams as well as update it over time. And 2, identify any external team members you'd actually like to have present in your network of teams play. Now, it's not normally something you'll do is to include external folks in, but if maybe you have a strong relationship with a team already, it may be a good idea to actually include a representative so that you can talk about your relationship and figure out how you want to improve it going forward. All right, I think it's time to run the play. And if you want to follow along, what I encourage you to do is click the link down below. It'll take you to the network of teams play in the playbook. And this way you can follow along step by step and kind of get an idea of what we're trying to pursue while we're doing this activity. All right, the day is here. It's time to run our network of teams. First thing we're going to do is actually begin with some team brainstorming. This is our opportunity to kind of come up with what are those different teams that we think are out there. And our goal is actually to classify teams with 2 different characteristics. The first characteristic is level of influence. Is a team critical to our success, meaning we can't actually complete our work without them? Are they involved with our success, but they're not on that critical path? The second characteristic is actually the type of team each team you identify is. Are they a delivery team? Are they a service team? Maybe another project team that's out there. Now, one thing I'm going to recommend here is that sometimes when teams start thinking about the different types of teams, they can start going down some rabbit holes that actually takes away from the purpose of the exercise. What I encourage you to do, put that to the side. It's simply there to help you identify maybe the type of relationships you need to have, but it's not critical to identifying which teams you need help from. All right, next, we're going to look at those teams in our critical to success circle. Now, here's the thing. If there's 5 or less teams there, awesome. That means each of those we need to focus on. If there are more than 5, what I typically recommend is teams prioritize those teams and ultimately start with that top 5. Once we've identified the 5 teams, now the important part happens. This is where we actually need to identify who's going to own the relationship with those teams. Now, when we come into this, we know there's teams that we need help from, but a lot of times we don't know how to begin that conversation. Well, it's easy. We assign someone to go and say hi. Go over there and say, you know what, we'd like to build this relationship with you. Let's talk about it. So we've established our owners. And going back to our example as a brand new team, at this point, we can kind of stop. We've identified those critical teams. We have owners for those, and we don't really have relationships yet. So that's what we're going to go pursue. So awesome. We can wrap that up. But if you're an existing team, if you're a team that's been doing this for a while, I recommend you proceed to the next step in the play, which is actually identifying the health of those relationships. Here, we'll actually use lines to signify that on our network of teams. If we do draw a solid line from our team to their team, it means we have a really strong relationship. If we do a dashed line, with that dashed line, it signifies that we have more of an ad hoc relationship. And finally, if we do a dotted line to that team, it means that that relationship needs some help. The whole goal here is to identify for those owners of those relationships, what's the current health, so that way they can start mending those bridges as they start that conversation. For those critical teams you identify, those top 5, make sure your relationship owners are actually doing their job. Make sure they're building those relationships. It could simply just be a meeting that they're having with them to talk about how do we want to work together, or it could be a regular session that they put on the calendar. Whatever the case, make sure there's some sort of connection happening. And just like a retrospective, I typically recommend teams come back and reflect on their network of teams on a regular basis. Maybe every 6 months or so, you come back and rerun the play. The purpose being is your relationships will have changed over time. Some may strengthen, some may weaken, new ones may emerge. Your network of teams is evolving. So what we need to do is continue to evolve with it. In this video, you're going to learn what is the working agreements play, the pre-work necessary to run the play, guidance and tips on how to facilitate the play, and how you should follow up after running the play. When asked what's the one thing I recommend a team do to help improve the way they collaborate, I always answer, create a working agreement. I think of working agreements as a great way to help make those implicit things that we assume in terms of how we work together very explicit. Things like, how do we give each other feedback? What tools do we use to communicate? How do we run our meetings? How do we escalate problems? And most importantly, how do we improve as a team? The focus here is actually creating a list of expectations that as a team, we can hold each other accountable for. So that way we can be successful and avoid things like misunderstandings at the end of the day. Here's a fact. 65% of team members are either working hybrid or fully remote. And there are a ton of challenges that come to bringing together teams in those type of environments. And if we really want to unleash the potential of teams and create things that are bigger than just any one person can create, we've got to be intentional with how we work together. Whether you're a new team or a team that's been together for years, having that shared understanding of how you want to collaborate together in a working agreement is critical to your success. All right, it's almost time to run the play. There's a couple things I want you to keep in mind, and there's a couple things you need to do before you get started. First, make sure you consider the space and how you want people to connect. I usually recommend we do things like use the Confluence template for working agreements as a great tool to actually be able to go out there and have people fill out information. Second, before you actually go into the session, you want your team members to fill out some information on how they like to work. What's their ideal working environment? How do they like to work? What hours do they work? How do they like to receive feedback? And if there's anything else they like to provide to give us context on how they like to work and collaborate with each other. And third, as a facilitator, you've got some homework too. Go out there and learn about how the team is actually communicating. What are those communication channels? What do meetings look like? And what's the current escalation process? Your goal is to gather what they do today and populate it in the template. Now, here's a tip. Don't add too many details in terms of how those things work. The more fleshed out and formal it looks, the more likely the team's going to think it's fully baked and they can't change it. Now, before we begin, one reminder. Click down on the link below to actually access the working agreements play from the Atlassian team playbook and follow along. All right, so it's time to run our working agreements play. First, let's consume the information we've already added to our working agreements page. This is all that pre-work we did. The way I like to do this is to basically take 10 minutes for people to do some review on their own. What this does, it allows the team to have a shared understanding of what the content currently says so we can move forward into the next section. After the silent review, we can now start the conversation. Start out reviewing the team preferences section. Here, I like to do is review any comments or questions that were left around people's working agreements. Have some conversation, but keep it light. The whole idea is not necessarily to go deep here, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Next, it's time to review the remaining sections. For each of these sections, I usually time box things so about 15 minutes each. Now, as you're going through each section, I have a couple tips I want to share with you. First, if you find yourself in a situation where maybe the conversation needs some more brainstorming, you need to get more of those generative ideas, I typically like to move my team over into some sort of whiteboarding tool at that point. We can use the sticky note functionality to just rapidly brainstorm, consolidate, and ultimately vote on our top items that we want included in our working agreement. From there, what I'll do is actually then just translate those over into the Confluence page right then and there. The second tip I have for you has to do with how we agree and align on our working agreements. I like to allow teams the option to vote instead of 2 ways, and I agree and disagree, but vote in 3 ways. In this way, when we vote, we say, hey, do you agree? I can say, I'm indifferent. And then 3 being, I disagree. And for disagree in this case, it has to be really intentional. It has to say, I disagree because I think what we're putting in here is actually going to hurt our team. This will prevent the team from necessarily getting wrapped around the axle and kind of going down rabbit holes of, wordsmithing and things like that, when really the intent is to focus on that path forward and saying, is this good enough for us to start? All right, now that we've reviewed the sections, let's take a step back and look at our working agreement. At this point, I usually do one final vote. Able to find out is, do we all agree that this is our working agreement? So I'll ask everyone on the count of 3, vote. They can give me a thumbs up. Yes, I agree. I want to move forward with this. They can give me a sideways thumb saying, I'm indifferent. I'm not going to stand in the way, but I think this is good enough to move forward. Or they can give me a thumbs down saying, I think there's a problem here we need to address. So if you get any thumbs down, what you need to do is you got to take some time to resolve those issues. Once you resolve those issues and everyone's on the same page, it's time to celebrate. You've got your working agreement. Now the fun part starts. It's actually putting that working agreement to use. So I've got a couple final tips I want to share with you in terms of what you do now that you have your working agreement. Tip number 1. Make sure your working agreement is visible. For you, you want to put it up front and center for your team. So I usually like to put it right on my homepage with a link to it. So that way, if I ever need to refer to it within my team, it's easy to find. Second, make sure you update your practices to reflect what you agreed to in your working agreement. Actually make sure someone has the action to make those changes to the practices that we follow, and then update the team at regular staff meetings on how things are going. The goal here is to actually put those changes in place and then reflect later on is that helping? And 3, use your working agreement. This is what your team agreed to in terms of your ways of working. So if you start to see patterns that are contrary to your ways of working, actually call it out and ask, should we change it? Working agreements are, again, one of my favorite plays, and it's something that every team should have because it helps us be intentful with how we work together. And the thing I want you to remember is that working agreements are living, breathing documents, meaning they're going to change over time and they should change. So I recommend that every 3 months or so, your team should review your working agreement and make any changes to it. As your ways of working evolve, we want our working agreements to evolve right along with them.